David, welcome back to the US. A flying start for you.
Thanks, Martha. No rest for the wicked, eh?
Straight back into a big story and now rescuing us on the podcast.
Absolutely. I feel so privileged, but I'm also in the hot seat under big pressure. So totally relying on you to carry us, Martha.
Well, welcome to Trump 100. Let's get started. I'm Martha Kelner.
And I'm David Blevins.
It's Tuesday, the 3rd of June, day 134 of Donald Trump's second term. And today we're asking why Donald Trump is weighing in on the row over a 16-year-old trans athlete here in California.
But first, a shocking attack on a vigil in Colorado has led to questions over the Trump administration's response to antisemitism.
Yeah, some very upsetting news coming in from Boulder, Colorado on Sunday night into Monday morning, David, just as you were arriving in the States.
Yes, so every Sunday since the Hamas attack on Israel in October 2023, a group has gathered in Boulder, Colorado, to raise awareness of the hostages still being held by Hamas in Gaza. I'm told that the size of the group varies, but they
Mhm.
always walk the same route through the city centre, reciting the names of the hostages, and sometimes they sing the Israeli national anthem too. It's become a really familiar sight on a Sunday for the people who live there. This weekend, it was turned upside down at around 1:26 p.m. local time. Police began receiving reports that people were being set on fire. Now, video from the scene shows a shirtless man shouting and clutching what looks like bottles. Other footage shows him being held down and detained by police. The
Mhm.
witnesses talk about seeing shoots of fire and smoke, water, and clothes being used to douse the flames. And there is clear evidence of scorch marks on the paving stones in the footage. It really was a
Mhm.
terrifying scene, Martha.
Yeah, really scary pictures coming out of Colorado. The FBI are calling this a targeted act of terrorism, and they've named the suspect as 45-year-old Mohammed Soliman. An FBI affidavit said that Solomon threw two Molotov cocktails on the marchers and yelled "Free Palestine," and that he told investigators he'd been planning the attack for a year, saying that he wanted to kill all Zionists. There was a bit of confusion initially, wasn't there, David? Because the report said at first that he'd been charged with first degree murder, despite there being no deaths in this case.
Yes, I think the confusion was caused by the fact that papers held at the county jail indicated that he was being detained there on suspicion of first degree murder and on suspicion of attempted murder. But it has now emerged that he's being charged with first degree murder and first degree attempted murder because apparently in Colorado there doesn't have to be a death for someone to face murder charges. Boulder police have confirmed that no one died in the attack, but it was certainly confusing for much of the day because I think, like most people, we assume there has to be a death for there to be a murder charge.
Witnesses from the scene, David, have reiterated that he was shouting "Free Palestine" as he was being arrested.
Yes, but I suppose that's becoming something America has become sadly used to in recent weeks. It was only 10 days ago, wasn't it, that
Mhm.
another man was arrested for the murders of two young Israeli embassy employees just down the road from where I'm sitting in Washington, D.C. And that man also was reported to have shouted Free Palestine as the police took him away. Uh, US Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a prominent Jewish Democrat, who will be well known to many, of course, has said this incident in Boulder was an anti Semitic attack. And he has been joined by a number of other politicians from both parties, both sides of the aisle, who have called out
Mhm.
the rise in anti Semitic violence in America since the October 7th attacks. I'm told that last year they recorded almost 9,000 incidents of an anti Semitic nature, and there was a 350% increase in incidents
Mhm.
of that type in the 3 months after the October 7th attacks.
Really worrying times for Jewish communities across this country. And the local law enforcement in Boulder say that they're going to be ensuring that any events in that area to mark what happened are given extra security, that there is extra attention paid to the Jewish community at this time. But the Trump administration is focusing on another aspect of this story. The Department of Homeland Security says that Solomon, the suspect in this case, is an Egyptian citizen who overstayed his visa when it ran out back in 2023. And President Trump, when he wrote on Truth Social on Monday afternoon, blamed Joe Biden's border policies for allowing Solomon into this country. He wrote, "This is yet another example of why we must keep our borders secure," in caps lock, "and deport illegal anti American radicals from our homeland." And on Monday afternoon, the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement Agency, otherwise known as ICE, say it's beefing up its tip line for people to call in allegations of potential crimes committed by people in the US without the right paperwork. So they are seeing a political opportunity, certainly in this tragedy, to crack down on illegal immigrants in this country, to deport immigration numbers further. And I'm sure, people will respond to what's happened with fear, clearly, but also with an awareness of Solomon's immigration status.
Yeah, and not for the first time, President Trump is blaming his predecessor, President Biden's
Yeah.
open door policy, as something his press secretary, Caroline Levitt, has been doubling down on this afternoon.
Mhm.
Okay, Martha, let's turn now to another story that's been making the headlines here in the United States. It's the row over a 16-year-old trans athlete who, this past weekend, won two events at the California High School Athletics Championship.
This is a big story, David. It's been, taking up space on the airwaves, national television over here, in all of the newspapers. And it concerns, as you say, this 16-year-old athlete. She's called AB Hernandez. She was born male and has transitioned, so now competes in the girls category for her high school team, which is the Jurupa Valley Jaguars. That's a high school here in California, not far from where I am in LA. So AB Hernandez qualified to compete in three events at the California State Championships. This is one of the most prestigious high school athletics events in the whole country. She qualified to compete in the high jump, the long jump, and the triple jump. But the parents of other high school athletes, conservative activists, even President Trump had publicly called for Hernandez to be barred from competing. Trump, people may remember, because we mentioned this on the podcast last week, he posted on Truth Social directly attacking AB's athletic ability, suggesting, in essence, that she was only doing so well in her chosen sport because she was competing against cis women. The Trump administration even threatened to withhold federal funding from California for allowing trans athletes to compete.
And that's because Trump tried to ban trans athletes from competing in women's sports back in February, of course. He signed an executive order to that effect, though it's currently being challenged in the courts. And we know that's part of a broader Trump policy to roll back inclusion policies across federal government, the military, and elsewhere.
Yeah.
Many of them are introduced under the Biden administration. Uh, Now, transgender inclusion is a sensitive issue, thorny issue in the
Mhm.
United States as it is around the world, but it's also a vote winner for Trump because he campaigned last year with a promise to kick out men from women's sport.
Yeah, this is one of the platforms that he ran on, David. And he had this incredibly popular campaign slogan, one of the most successful campaign slogans in recent times, that was Kamala is for they, them, President Trump is for you. And it really did capture, people's imagination. It was very successful strategic move and really appealed to his base. And there are people here in California who see AB Hernandez's inclusion in this athletics event as tantamount to the exclusion of other competitors. Their argument is that because she's transitioned, she has physical advantages that the other athletes she's competing against don't have. And, there is scientific evidence to back that up. There was a study done by a university in Sweden, the Karolinska Institute, that showed that if you go through puberty as a male, you retain musculoskeletal advantages over people born female, regardless of whether you take testosterone suppressants, hormones. So there is scientific evidence to back up what those activists are saying. And even California's Democratic governor, Gavin Newsom, he said back in March that he believed allowing trans athletes to compete in women's sports was, in his words, deeply unfair. So this is not necessarily an issue that's divided down party lines either. In fact, I was speaking to a lady who was protesting AB Hernandez's participation outside the event, and she said, I'm a Democrat, I am very open minded. Generally, I'm socially very liberal, but she felt very exercised by the fact that, in her words, this was unfair to the other girls that were competing in the event.
The transgender male, he is not our enemy. We we want him to be able to compete also, but in the right frame.
These kids get up at the crack of dawn, like 5 in the morning. They work out before school, they go to school, they work out after school, the weekends they work out. And for that just to be taken away so that we can make a boy feel better is just, it's wrong. It's very wrong.
So protests outside that event. You may also have seen, David, a video that went viral last week on social media, which showed AB Hernandez's mum being harangued by the parents of other competitors.
Boys are boys, girls are girls. This son does not belong competing against those girls, period. What a coward of a woman you are allowing that. What a coward of a woman our woman, telling
One of those parents was a lady named Sonia Shaw, as well as being a parent herself of school athletes. She's also the school board president for Chino Valley in California and a budding politician. I spoke to her ahead of the state championships where AB Hernandez was competing.
I said, boys are boys, girls are girls. And then I turned to the stands and I'm like, is there anybody that's okay with a boy competing against the girls right now?
There are, as far as we know, only a handful of transgender girls playing girls' sport. Is this being overblown?
Absolutely not, because it's growing. You have girls who should be on that first place podium. They work their whole life. Their dream is to be a CIF final, a winner. And they can't even win. They can't even compete against these boys.
Sonia isn't alone in that view, of course. Martha, there were some protesters at the event itself, right? I saw footage of one of those planes pulling a banner behind it that read, "No boys in girls' sport."
Yeah, as AB Hernandez was sort of going through her preparations for the high jump and the long jump, there was this plane going round and round the stadium for hours, actually. And that had been paid for by two women's rights advocacy groups. There were, though, quite a few people there in support of AB. I also spoke to one of the transgender rights activists who showed up to the event to support her.
All girls deserve to play in girls' sports, and trans girls are girls, so they don't have any extra extreme advantage than somebody who is naturally tall or has naturally wide wingspan, like Michael Phelps.
So inside the event, there were no protests, and Hernandez was able to compete. Now, help me to understand this. It required a change of the rules. Just before the event, the school's Interscholastic Federation had confirmed that an extra student would be allowed to compete and win a medal in the events where Hernandez qualified.
Yeah, it's a little confusing, David, but that is exactly what happened. More competitors were able to take part in the events that she was partaking in. And in two of the events, Hernandez did end up winning. In one of them, the high jump, two other girls all reached the same height. So all three shared the first place win. They were smiling as they stepped up onto this podium together. One of the girls who won an event with AB Hernandez, she told the San Francisco Chronicle local paper that sharing the podium, in her words, was nothing but an honor. So it does seem like that compromise on the field at least worked out for most of those girls. But it's not an end to this debate, far from it. The Trump administration still intends to sanction sporting events that allow trans athletes to compete in women's categories. And, the Men's Football World Cup is coming up here, the Olympics being hosted in LA in 2028. So Donald Trump's stance on trans inclusion in sport is going to remain a live topic, I'm sure.
A couple of other things before we go. The Trump administration asked a US appeals court to pause a second ruling that found the president had exceeded his authority by imposing our favorite topic, sweeping tariffs on imports, saying the decision jeopardizes trade negotiations with other nations.
Yeah, so last week, a court in New York ruled that Donald Trump's tariffs were illegal, ordering them to be scrapped. That decision was paused until next week by appeals court judges. But there was a second ruling, this one from a court in Washington, which has a less immediate impact than the New York ruling, but would still hamper Trump's tariff plans. So he wants to get that paused as well.
If you thought you were not going to be talking about tariffs for a while, then you're mistaken.
Yeah, we certainly will. I bet you're glad to be back on Tariff Watch, David. Before we go, I've got a question for you. What is the image on your phone lock screen right now?
Uh, on my lock screen, I think it still is.
Yeah.
Yes, it still is. My three grandchildren, because two of them
Oh,
live in America, one of them lives in Ireland. They're not together very often. So I have a very recent picture of the three of them together in Rhode Island.
Oh, that's very sweet. Well, mine not so sentimental. Mine's a picture of the Grand Canyon. But the reason I'm asking is because a photo has emerged, snapped by the Reuters news agency at the end of last week, which shows Donald Trump holding a phone, and the photo on his lock screen, well, it is a photo of Donald Trump. Who else would he have a picture of but himself on his phone? And this reminded me, David, of an interview I did with Paris Hilton at her house. And it reminds me of that for this reason. We walked into her home and her entire house, corridors, living room, sitting room, all decorated with pictures of Paris Hilton. None of her kids, her husband, just Paris Hilton. And she also had these cushion covers, which had a picture of her face on there.
You see, what more could people ask for? Paris Hilton and Donald Trump in the one podcast.
Yeah, only on Trump 100. Anyway, that's it for today's episode. But as always, you can get in touch with us on Trump100@sky.uk.
And you can help us spread the word by following the podcast wherever you're listening. And why not write a review for us too?
And we'll be back tomorrow for another day of Trump 100.
See you then.